Hey there, I am happy to announce the launch of J. Brown Yoga Talks Premium. I've often mentioned how much I appreciate getting emails from listeners who share with me how much they're getting from the show. And those emails, they always end the same way, by saying, please keep doing it. And if that's a sentiment you share, if you value what you get from listening to this podcast, you appreciate that there's a new episode every week, then becoming a premium subscriber is the best way to show your support. Not to mention, you get unlimited access to the full archives. It's J. Brown Yoga Talks Premium. Go check it out at jbrownyoga.com/premium. That's jbrownyoga.com/premium. Okay, is it that time again already? Must be, or I wouldn't be talking and you wouldn't be listening. This is J. Brown Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is J. Brown. Welcome and thanks to new and returning friends. How is everyone? Are you doing okay? I hope so. I got a very cool live panel discussion to share with you today that I recorded in Sydney, Australia last month. Maybe you remember if you were following along. I recorded some intros while I was traveling about. Well, while I was there, I recorded a very cool conversation among a few Australian old school luminaries, and I'm going to share that with you today. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, but before I do, I really need a little bit of your thoughts and prayers right now, my friends. I'm a bit upset, I have to say. It's late. I was going to do this earlier, but I have a bit of a situation. You see, a little bit less than a year ago, I took my eldest daughter, Roslyn, to a solstice fair, and she won a goldfish. You know, you take the ping pong ball and you got to throw it in the little bowl. Well, hers went in the bowl and she got the goldfish. So we brought the goldfish home. My daughter named the goldfish Goldie. So now we have Goldie the goldfish. This is our first family pet, I guess you could say. So for the first 3 days, I had Goldie in just a bowl. But you learn very quickly that you actually can't do that. Like in the cartoons where it's like the fish bowl, you can't do it because like that water turns yellow within 3 days. You gotta be changing water all the time. So I went to the pet store. I got like a little mini tank with a plant and some rocks and a filter and put Goldie in that, and she's been doing great. It's been almost a year, and I've really developed some relationship to this fish. I mean, I'm the one who pretty much takes care of it. Roslyn, she feeds it. It's her job to feed it, and she does that. But she's not really old enough to deal with the tank water, so I'm pretty much doing that every week or two. I'm changing the water, and I always just sit there for a while and just watch Goldie. And it's very relaxing. I guess that's why they put fishes in the doctor's offices, right? They put those fish tanks because it's very relaxing to watch fish, I found. And she's very animated. She seems to have like a lot of personality, you know. Every time you go to feed her, she comes up and she's like, you know, she's got like a personality. It's Goldie the goldfish. Well, Goldie grew. She got bigger. And, you know, over the last few weeks, every time I was going in there, I just felt like she looked cramped. Like I felt like she outgrew the tank. The tank was too small for her. So I wanted to give her a bigger tank. So I went and bought a new one. Got a bigger tank. 2 days ago, I moved her into the new tank. And I read a bunch of stuff, you know, it's like aquariums. It's like a whole science, you know, literally. And I didn't do everything. I didn't do all the testing, you know. I didn't do all the stuff. I mean, I did the main important things that they say to do, but I didn't do everything that they say to do. And it seemed like it was fine, you know. She seemed really happy in the new tank. And then this morning, I went in there and she doesn't look good. Like she's sick, I think. She's not, her eyes are all cloudy and she's not acting like herself. She's not acting normal. She wasn't really like coming up for the food. And then I had to go work. I had to go teach, and I left. And so I came back this evening, and, she's not doing good. And, fortunately right now, my daughter is away. My wife and my daughters, they went up to my in-laws for the holiday. I'm going to meet them there in a few days, but she's gone. And of course, this happens while she's gone, right? Which is maybe good, because then she doesn't have to have, like, the trauma of seeing the sick fish. And, I did a bunch of research, and hopefully it's just an infection, and it could clear up, and she could get better. But I may have, permanently blinded her. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe I didn't clean the tank out well enough. I just kind of rinsed it. I didn't really do a thorough cleaning of the new tank. Or maybe I didn't use enough of the old tank water. I mean, I used some of it, but I wanted it to be clean and fresh, but you're supposed to use the old tank water with the new tank water, and I don't know. I did read that if it's the cloudy eye thing, which is really, I really think it is, like from what I can read, it seems like that's what it is, that you can put salt in there. And I did that. So I took the live plant out, and I made the salt solution like they said to do online, the low-dose salt solution, and I put it in there, like give her some medicine. And she seemed to actually perk up, or something for a minute there. I don't know. So anyways, I'm just hoping that when I go in there tomorrow, that she's going to be okay, that she's going to pull through, I know it's just a goldfish, but I'm feeling really emotional about it. Like, I don't want this fish to die. I really don't want Goldie to die. So maybe you'll just, I don't know, by the time you guys listen to this, it may already be a done deal. I don't know what the situation's going to be by the time this comes out. But just when you hear this, maybe give a little prayer for Goldie. I'm hoping that she's going to be okay. But that really doesn't bear much relevance to the conversation that I'm going to share with you today, which is really talking about a lot of things that I think are happening in the yoga world out there. And those of you who own centers, or even just those of you who are, grinding it out, teaching a bunch of classes a week at maybe more than one center, I think that you're going to hear some of what I feel are common trends that are taking place these days in terms of how centers were trying to grow and grow and grow, but how at some point the real estate gets the better of you, or there's other circumstances, and then a lot of times these days people are really downsizing in a way and getting smaller but deeper, and finding a way to make what they're doing a little bit more sustainable and not so much of just like taking on these huge overheads, So in any case, the folks in today's talk, Nicole Walsh, I had never met her before, but she's, a big deal. Everybody knows her in Sydney. That's everybody I've mentioned her name to in Sydney knew who she was. She opened like one of the biggest centers that was there, and she's gone through a whole progression. She went from having like this big brand center with a bunch of locations to really distilling it down. She's opening a new place. I believe it's already open. It's called In Yoga, where she's focusing a lot more on advanced training for teachers, a deeper inquiry for people who want to go further in their studies, and then just having a modest amount of classes for the local community. Like I'm saying, finding a way to serve the real yoga that you're after and not just try to like work the business, Find a way to make the business go to the yoga more. In any case, you'll hear. And then Mark O'Brien, who is the wonderful man who owns Key Yoga and hosts me when I go there and is just an all-around fantastic person, an incredibly witty man, and I think you can hear that even from the way he speaks in this talk. And then also Michael de Manincor, and you guys know Michael. He's been on the show before. He's always got a good strong viewpoint to share. We get into a little bit of teacher training stuff, but overall it's just a good talking shop, and I think that you're going to enjoy it. I'm very excited to be sharing it with you today. Before we listen to it, though, let me just say one more thing about Deeper Inquiry and today's sponsor, Yogic Studies. Those of you who listen have heard me talk about Yogic Studies, and Seth Powell, the founder, who's been on the show before. I took his History and Philosophy of Yoga course. I got a lot out of it. I talked all about it. You should go back and listen. And Seth's just an all-around great guy and fantastic teacher. He has a way of presenting the texts and Sanskrit and often very hard to grasp concepts about the history and philosophies of yoga in a way that makes them accessible and practical and expands your knowledge base and makes you a more informed practitioner and teacher. And as a listener of the show, you can get 15% off if you use promo code JBrown15, all capital letters. That's promo code JBrown15, all capital letters. You can get 15% off. Go to yogicstudies.com. Let me also just drop a couple of gigs I got coming up as well. I'm going to be at the Lehigh Valley Yoga Festival, July 13th, if you're in the Lehigh Valley this summer. And I am going to be in Japan, July 19th through the 28th. If you happen to be there, you can find out about those gigs and more, and all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. All right, I think that's it. I will touch base with you on the other side and tell you about who's coming on next week. We're going to get back into some pain science. You can check in with me on the other side to find out who that is. But for now, let's do it. Let's go to Sydney, Australia, and listen to this conversation that I had with Nicole Walsh, Mark O'Brien, and Michael de Manincor.
That's the school bells. Good evening, everybody. If you don't know me, my name's Mark, and thank you so much for coming out on Friday night. The description was very vague about what was going to happen for a very good reason, which is I have absolutely, well, in fact, none of us have any idea what is going to transpire. So when you hear about being in the moment, that's what's happening up here. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I would like to introduce Michael de Manincor, probably many of you know from Yoga Institute and many other things that he'll talk about. Nicole Walsh from every great yoga centre there's ever been in Sydney.
Except this one, I'm not from this one.
Oh, except this one. And fresh off the plane, he doesn't know if it's breakfast, lunch or dinner. Jet lag is kicking in. My great friend Jay Brown, who's over here from the States, who's here for a series of workshops, and he said, hey, let's have a chat. So here he is. Jay, it's over to you because I don't know what's happening.
Neither do I, really. But I have a theory, and I have a sense that most of the people here have listened to the show some. Is there anybody who's never listened to the show before? A couple of folks. All right, so you guys might not know that, but as a general thing, I don't write out questions. How many of you are yoga teachers? Look at that. Pretty much almost everyone is like one or two. Don't be shy. I'm glad you guys are here. It's important that there's a few non-yoga teachers in the room, but they're probably trained and they don't like to call themselves yoga teachers. But maybe not. But for those of my friends who aren't familiar with the show who are here, I would just say that as yoga teachers, since almost all of us are, most of us have some scripts, sort of have to be effective in a way. And it's very easy when I get together with a yoga teacher, I'd put on a recording like this and we're holding microphones for us to default to those things. But if we don't default to those things, I think much more interesting conversations happen. And if we were all just sitting around and we weren't holding microphones and like having a glass of wine, we wouldn't have any trouble coming up with things to talk about. So that's my theory. But this is a different scenario than us sitting around and having wine. You guys are all here, and there's a bit of an audience element to that, so we want to acknowledge that. But I haven't met Nicole before. Michael's been on the show before. You guys should go back and listen to that. We covered lots of ground. And Mark's never been on the show, but we've become friends some because he's been hosting here, and he does a very fine job of that, might I say. And so I also, in just like a little bit getting ready today, learning a little bit about Nicole and what I know of Michael and Mark, it seemed like there was already some emerging topics of themes we might need to chat about, because all of these folks are sort of long-time yoga center owners. Those of you who listen to this show, a couple of you haven't. I owned a yoga center for 10 years in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which I sold 2 years ago. Moved my family 2 hours outside of the city to somewhere I could actually afford. And so I think I've observed that there's sort of an evolutionary process that happens in these yoga markets. And there's still places in the world where they're booming, but like in North America, the boom is not like it was. Things have really changed quite drastically. And not that long, in my own lifetime. And I'm a pretty young man still in terms of yoga. And that is some of what the podcast has been a lot about for me. I started as a yoga teacher in my early 20s, where yoga was still a little bit coming out of like the living rooms and the church basements. Nobody had these spa-like centers or any of that stuff. And I rode the wave completely. I followed the people who came before me and emulated them, and had a center for 10 years and rode that. And then now I've been just trying to suss out how the hell do we get here, and what's happening now, and I feel like Australia is in the same evolutionary process, but maybe not quite hasn't crashed as much yet. And I'm one for predictions, but I think there's like some fundamental things that I'm betting some of you have also discovered, like I discovered, that became that are problematic. Not that they can't be worked out. Mark's still going pretty strong after 18 years. But I know you had to reroute a couple of times. So, hi, Nicole.
Hi, Jay.
I don't know a lot about you. I didn't get to go online and do my usual thing. I got just a little debrief from Mark in the ride home from the airport yesterday.
Right.
But even in that little debrief, I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be easy, because as I understand it, you opened what became a pretty big center in Australia. What was the name of that?
It was Body, Mind, Life.
Body, Mind, Life.
Yeah.
And when did that happen? Or first, we should go back earlier than that. We don't have to go all the way to the super beginnings, but just when did you first get to yoga, and was it here in Australia?
Yeah, definitely. I started practicing when I was in my, mid-20s. And like you said before, yoga was just coming out of the living rooms and the church basements. Well, here it was the surf clubs and the garages, I think. Yeah. So, and interestingly, I started my yoga journey at a little studio just right across the street here, because I used to live in the area, and that was the Bikram Yoga Studio. So that was kind of the beginning of, I guess, what you'd call the boom in Australia before it boomed. And so, yeah, I that was my practice when I started. And
at that Bikram studio.
At that Bikram studio. And Yeah, it was. I loved it. It was, and it's funny. Not long after I did my my Bikram teacher training, and then opened my studio, was when I met Michael, because he was one of my teachers at my second teacher training course that I did, which was like a long-term 2.5 year course.
But you did Bikram training first?
Did Bikram training first.
Here in Australia?
No, went to the US.
Did you do it with him?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
you
my
had to.
gosh.
You had to. That was the only way.
So you dropped, it was like 10 grand and like heard him say all kinds of crazy. Did you witness it? Did you?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the.
What was that? I'm always amazed by that. No, but I'm always amazed by this because this is a huge thing in the yoga world. I mean, even, I don't know if I want to go there, but he's still out there.
Is he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even after everything's come out about him, he just went to some other place in the world where they're not as aware of it.
Right.
And he still gets huge groups of people to do these trainings with him.
Yeah, I mean, I've been out of that whole community for a very long time.
Yeah.
So,
well, I've talked to other people who did those trainings, and they were like, well, I had really great people that I was around, and there's all kinds of like rationalizing that has to happen because you drop all that money and, and you have a connection to practice, but... So what happened? What was it like for you? Sorry.
Well, I think it's gone up in price quite a lot since I did. I think it was maybe $5,000. Okay. But then at that time, the Aussie dollar was at an all-time low. So I probably did spend $10,000 at the end of the day. But yeah, so I went to LA. I spent the 3 months there, and I did that whole training. And
what was your experience of that?
It was amazing because it was my first yoga training, and I guess it was exciting, and I was doing something that I loved, and it was very new, and I really saw myself, becoming a teacher and having a studio. That was my plan right from the very beginning, and because I was really keen to get out of what I was already doing, and.
What was that? What did you want to get out of?
I was working in the airline industry.
Okay.
And, I'd been kind of on this seeking path of wanting to do something in the well-being scenario. I did a massage diploma. I did a aromatherapy course, just kind of looking. And then I found myself just by default at a yoga class right over the street there, and I think 3 months into that, I was like, right, I feel like this is my future. I had this really strong sense, and I was also one of my first, out of my group of friends, one of my first, people in my community that was actually practicing yoga on a regular basis, and it was it was a really hard conversation to have with my parents that I was going to give up a really good job with benefits for them because I was in the travel industry and go and do a yoga teacher training and become a teacher. It was, and people were like, what?
Crazy.
And it was crazy because people were like, well, what are you going to do for money? That was the conversation back then, and I was like, I don't know, I think it's going to work. I think this is going to... I just had this, I don't know where it even came from, but this sense that yoga was... It was about to really... And, I wasn't looking at it from like a money perspective, but it was like a career that I could have that would be really satisfying and fulfilling, and doing something that I really loved and gave me a lot of joy, and just totally changed my life. So I was like, why aren't more people doing this? So that was when I decided to become a teacher. And
what year was that? What was that? What year was it when you hit that 3 month where you're like, I think this is going to be my thing? It
was about 1999, actually. Yeah.
See, I think right around the same time as you. I think for me it was 95 actually. But at that time, and I'm curious if you feel like it was true for you, it was a counterculture move. Like you're saying, there was no mainstream yoga yet. So I always say, if I was at a party and someone asked me what I did and I said, I'm a yoga teacher, they would say, what's that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Now, if you say that, they say, "Well, what kind?"
That's so true. Yeah.
So it was a counter move, and
yeah.
You know.
Well, and even I mean, just talking to people about what you did. A lot of people hadn't even heard of yoga. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a household word. It was something you had to kind of explain. Oh, isn't that they sit and they burn incense and chant Om and I was doing the opposite end of the spectrum yoga for that because I was in the hot room sweating, and so it was very different. And there was a little bit of an intrigue with that, and I think that's one of the reasons why I felt really sure that was the path that I wanted to take. And, went and did that training. And it was interesting. I got a lot out of it, personally for my own practice. And I think the biggest thing for me was just self-confidence of just getting up in front of people and speaking, because at that point, I was a very shy person. And that changed.
What was your interaction with the man himself?
It's funny. I didn't really have a lot of interaction with him during the training. He would kind of cruise in like a rock star, wearing his white pants,
glamour,
and
Speedo or whatever,
all of that. But I had a really good connection with a couple of the other teachers that sort of co-facilitated the training, and it was interesting. Like, he actually drew some really amazing people around him, and I think that was what really got people through the training. That he had a couple of really key teachers that were they were the anchors for that training. And Bikram would just come in and, cause a ruckus.
Big groups,
and,
right?
Yeah. Like
hundreds of people.
I think I had 180 in my training. Yeah. And it's totally production line, in terms of the training. You don't really, from my perspective, learn so much about yoga, which is why when I got back from that training, like literally the next day, I was like, looking for other yoga trainings, which is where I ended up at Nature Care College, which is where I met Michael. And
so you had a sense of its limitations.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Because that 26 poses and 2 breathing exercises in a set script, I'm actually a fan of a set thing for people starting.
Yeah.
Like, I'm actually okay with that. I have a somewhat set thing. It's just it can't be fixed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And, I totally believe that, especially for beginners, that idea of consistency for a period of time is really helpful. But I think what kind of made me move away from Bikram yoga when I chose to was that the limitation around being able to modify practice for people's individual needs. It was kind of like, trying to fit all of the people into the one shape. Mm-hmm. Whereas, as we know, as teachers, that there are so many different types of bodies and, all the different things that we're presented with in a yoga class, that started to feel restricted to me. And that's where I felt like, right, I need to
branch out.
Really branch out and just look into this more and obviously learn more. And interestingly also, within 9 months of me coming back from my teacher training, I opened my studio. So
I mean, that's interesting to me too, because you said you had that in mind from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I guess I waited like 10 years before I opened a place. But there was certainly a feeling at that time of, wow, this is important. Like, if you had a transformative experience with yoga and where you lived, like, nobody knew about it and there wasn't any yoga centers. Yeah. There's like this natural impulse to want to like open to do that.
Totally.
So I could get that, and I get that sense from you that you had it in mind. Like, I'm gonna do a thing.
Yeah, and I always saw myself having my own business of some kind, and my dad is very entrepreneurial, and I think I just inherited that from him. But I didn't know what it was going to be. I really had no idea. But then when I kind of fell in love with yoga, I was like, I could see myself doing this, daily. for a very long time, and that was what really inspired me to open a studio. And also, aside from that, as a Bikram yoga teacher, there are kind of rules around where you can teach and where you can't teach. And
at that time, you're supposed to put a picture of him up there,
totally,
and pay him a bunch of money and stuff.
Yeah. So there was only just this one little studio here in Freshwater in the whole of Australia, and so
what was the name of that spot? Is it still there?
It's the Bendigo Bank now.
Amazing.
So the woman that owns that studio, she's now up in Brookvale, still 20 years later, and just going great guns. And she has an amazing community. So, which
yeah, the ones who get in early sometimes are able to stick it out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you said you started to branch out. You met Michael where? What was Michael doing?
So there is a natural therapies college in Sydney called Nature Care College, and they did. I think they're still there. I'm not sure, but they do a range of diplomas, and you can study naturopathy and homeopathy and massage, and they had a yoga advanced diploma course, and and there wasn't really much teacher training in Sydney at that time, so I kind of looked around, and that one it just felt like it was going to be a good real education for me, and so. What
was Michael like back then?
Michael was great.
See, right before we started this, Michael's like, sometimes when we do these panels, everybody's too nice. And they don't say what they really feel. And so can we make sure that we don't get into that? So right now, Nicole, is the moment. He asked for it.
Yes. However, so I had Michael for one subject, and
what was the subject? Do you remember?
It was the yogic overview of the mind.
Ooh, that sounds like Michael.
Totally, and it was great. It was because it was all new to me, understanding about the how yoga views the mind, and I love the subject. But every now and again, we'd have these little interactions, and Michael would say, "So, how's that Bikram yoga going?" And I'd go, "Yeah, it's great. My studio's great. I'm loving it." And he'd go, "You might want to rethink that teaching Bikram yoga."
That was friendly enough. Yeah.
And every time he said that to me, because it did come up quite a few times, I go, yeah, sure, Michael. It's really working for me right now, and I'm just going to keep doing it until it doesn't work for me anymore. And eventually that happened. So thank you, Michael.
But when you opened the center, that's what you were primarily teaching?
Yeah.
And you were just learning some other stuff at the same time.
I was teaching the Bikram sequence and learning a lot about yoga in general, and I really put that down to that being my real education. But I guess the thing that started coming up for me when I was teaching and learning so much were there were a few things with the way Bikram yoga was taught that started to not feel right and to not resonate with me, understanding more about the body, human body, and how it's meant to move, and things that I was experiencing physically in my body that were starting to not feel so good, like, the heat and just sort of like overstretching and then also too, I was starting to see the depth of yoga and where I felt like I wanted to take it further. I wanted to offer meditation. I wanted to, really give the full spectrum rather than just 26 postures. So that was where I started to have a little. I guess it wasn't working for me so much anymore. And then I was like, what am I going to do? I've got this studio.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the method, I always say, I don't think that poses are inherently injurious.
No.
I think I could do those 26 poses in a way that would be totally therapeutically oriented if I'm allowed to not stick to the script and make changes.
Correct.
If you're not.
Yes.
And I remember I went to only couple of Bikram classes, maybe two. But I'll never forget the second and last one I went to. The teacher was so like, you might throw up, and it's all part of it. And I was like totally turned off because there was a certain, other than just the 26 poses and breathing exercises and even script, there was a certain mindset to it. And that mindset, which is what me and Michael talked about, and what his course was about a little bit with you, is what I think changes what happens in the forms.
Yeah,
right?
totally. And I started to go off the script. And I know it was outrageous to many people, and I was called all kinds of things like the bootleg Bikram Yoga Studio and the Mickey Mouse Bikram Yoga Studio.
Mickey Mouse.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was, it was interesting.
Someone was channeling Bikram there.
Yeah. Well, no, that's what Bikram called me.
Oh, you got that from him?
Yes.
So he got wind.
Yes. Yeah.
And so how did that happen? Did you get like a call from him, or like there was no email yet, right?
No.
So how does it happen back when? How does Bikram let you know he doesn't like what you're doing?
They did have this was after email was invented.
I'm sorry. my timeline's not so good. I'm still a little jet lagged
This
too.
is early 2000s.
Okay,
so,
sorry.
Yeah.
So did you get an email from him, or how does it happen?
Well, it kind of, I just kept doing my thing and teaching Bikram and feeling more and more like I didn't want to be teaching Bikram. And, but in a real, the real question of, okay, well, now what do I do with this studio that I've invested a lot of money in?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to interrupt, but were you an authorized studio?
Yeah, I was an authorized studio.
Because that was before he tried to clamp down. At some point, he tried to clamp down controls on the centers.
And that was before you had to pay him, 10% of profits or anything like that. So,
I see.
And he had been to my studio when he visited Sydney, and
you hosted him, eh?
I didn't host him personally, but the Bikram community hosted him, and I was one of the studio owners. So I actually got to know him, relatively well at sort of at arm's length, and his family when they came out, and so I saw many sides of him.
That's what I was just going to ask. I was going to say, so if I know traveling around and doing workshops and stuff, I always like I'm staying at Mark's place. Like if I can stay at like my host place and stay on their couch, I always like to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of curious, how different was he when he wasn't on show and being a rock star?
Yeah. Well, firstly, he didn't sleep on my couch.
Good to clarify that.
But he was very. I mean, you see this kind of, the performer Bikram when he's in his trainings, and he's all, "Are you chicken shit?" and all this kind of. Oops, can I swear on this?
Yes,
Sorry.
you can swear all you want.
Sure.
Fuck shit. Sorry, just get it out of the way.
But then when he came here, he was with his wife and two young children, and his wife is just gorgeous. She is, well, they're not married anymore. She was just a beautiful human being. I really liked her a lot, and I could sort of see, she was in an awkward position because she was, having to she was actually incredible in her own right as a teacher, and as a, she was more along the yoga therapy side, but just incredible wisdom and a lot of heart as well. So I really connected with her. But yeah, interesting just to see the dynamics. Him with his kids, and he is a doting father, and appeared to be a doting husband, but. Then there's a lot of other stories that kind of swirl around in the background.
I have to ask you about that, and not, I hate that I have to, but did you observe or witness or were aware of these horrible sexual abuses and abuses of power that were going on? Yeah,
I never witnessed anything while I was at his centres or with him, and I didn't know anyone personally while I was going through my trainings and that kind of thing. But it was kind of, there was a few things that would happen in the trainings that ask somebody to come up and brush his hair, and everyone thought it was a bit cute, and it was. But it was.
Now in
it
retrospect, it's not as cute, right?
Yeah. But I mean, he had so many different. You saw so many different sides to him that it was. I can understand why it would have been very easy to be confused by, that whole behaviour and, kind of drawn into the whole guru complex, which is really what was going on. And that's what I really saw was there was, he was of that, tradition where, he had a guru, he became the guru. All of the people that taught, for him, he was the guru, and you just didn't question that. So that was the...
Yeah, I had Jerome Armstrong, and we talked about ghost yoga and where he stole all of his stuff from, basically.
Right. And then tried to patent it.
Yeah. But it's interesting, I also just recently talked to this guy, Jim Mounce, and this big scholar guy, and he had a guru, and he said something kind of offhanded about how I picked him, how did you choose your guru? And he said, charisma.
Yeah.
And I really think it's something to consider how much of the yoga world was built on charisma.
Yeah.
And how much that has led astray.
Yeah, well, it can be dangerous.
Yeah, especially when big institutions form around them and there's a big pyramid with some guy at the top.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, that's a thing. But so when you opened the studio, did you do that all by yourself? Did you have like a partner to help? I just know I did it by myself, and I had no business experience, and So were you alone? Did you have somebody who knew more about numbers, or were you minded that way? 'Cause
it's a complex question. I was in business with my ex-husband, and when I was planning to do the studio, he had another career, and it was always going to be my studio, and he wasn't really into yoga. But just the day before I opened my studio, he got made redundant from his job, and so suddenly he became sort of the business side of things. And even though he hadn't really had that much, neither of us, I'd had zero business experience. So I kind of, and I think I started off like a lot of yoga studio owners do, where they, you go into a studio because you love yoga and you have that passion for it, and it's like, I'm just going to be teaching yoga all day, and then you realize that you've got to, pay tax and
See, I discovered this too. There's a very big difference between owning your job and having a business.
Yeah.
And I just owned my job for a long time.
Yeah. But I guess I was very curious and open to receiving support from people around me, and I was lucky I did have a lot of people around me that were able to just kind of weigh in here and there, and friends.
And you got in at the time.
Yes, yeah.
You wrote the wave was just coming, so it was like a right time.
It's all about timing, yeah. And so just recently, in the last 5 years, started a new studio after I left that one.
That's where I'm going. So that first studio, how long did you have that
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
And it started as a Bikram studio, but it sounds like it didn't end as a Bikram studio.
No.
So you transitioned away from Bikram, and how did that go? Did people how did that? Because I right now there's a lot of people in the yoga world trying to transition, and if you already have like a strong identity as a teacher, you banked your career on a guru or whatever. Making that transition isn't always very easy, so you had to do it.
I did it gradually. I did it over a couple of years, and I was continuing studying at Nature Care College, and I was also studying with Baron Baptiste in the US.
Okay, so that's a transition thing from Bikram.
Well, he did the same, which is interesting.
That is.
And it wasn't my intention. It was just something I always tended to follow, just sort of like instinct and sort of feeling. And I just happened across his book, read the book, looked in the back. There was a website. Went to the website. 3 weeks later, there was a training. Went to the training. Met some people who lived in Boston, which is where he was based, spent a whole lot of time going over there, just kind of sussing out how studios worked in the US. And, when you were saying before about how Australia seems to be a little bit just kind of like a few steps behind. Yeah, it was back then it was kind of like 5 to 7 years behind the trends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was, going a lot back and forth to the US and hanging out in studios.
Right. Yes.
Making notes. Couldn't take photos on iPhones because they weren't invented then.
No.
But just really taking note and spending time chatting to teachers and really, just seeing how things were done. And so when I was like, okay, well, this is the next evolution. And so I...
you got on the Power Vinyasa train.
Got on the Power Vinyasa train.
Yeah.
Opened up another studio.
Okay, but wait. The first one lasted 12 years.
So...
It ended because of the lease or because of the marriage? Sorry.
Again, that's
he told me not to be too nice.
So my relationship with that studio ended because of the marriage.
Yeah.
But we had... interestingly, I feel like this conversation is going all over the place, so I'm just going to follow the thread. As we came to the end of a lease, as we were divorcing and signing a new lease on another premises. So we kind of went into business as ex-partners on a second...
That's civil.
So actually just backtracking to the second studio that I opened, which is not this one that we're talking about right now, but
So
I
opened in-between studio?
Yeah.
Wait, so you had one for 12 years?
So I had the Bikram studio.
Okay.
4 years into that, I opened a second studio.
Like
another location.
Okay.
Where that was the Power Vinyasa studio.
That was the gradual transition.
So that was the gradual transition. And then 2 years after that, decided, well, this is crazy having two studios. It was a lot of work.
See, I know that too because you open one place and it's functioning.
Yeah.
And you know how to do it now.
Yeah.
You got gear.
Yeah.
You already order all the paper products for the bathroom or whatever, and then you're just walking around and you just see these for rent signs. Like I could put another one right there. It's just like in your mind.
Yes.
It seems like that would make perfect sense.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, you do it and you're drowning.
Totally. Yeah. So that happened. And my ex-husband, my business partner at the time, he was very interested in expanding and economies of scale and all this kind of thing. You got to grow,
yes.
And so we did a second studio.
The death of yoga centers, by the way.
Yeah, and so it was almost the death of us. And then we were like, right, we're going to bring it all back to the one studio. We're going to fly in the face of all the Bikram rules of having Bikram and another type of style of yoga because people were really getting onto Power Vinyasa. There was no Vinyasa really in Sydney other than Ashtanga and Yoga Synergy, which is another long-term school in Sydney. And so, again, just starting to ride that wave of where modern yoga was going. And so brought it back to one studio, split the schedule in half Bikram, half Power Vinyasa, and that was when I got the letter.
Oh, you see, we came back round to that. I'm glad.
Yes.
So you got the letter in the mail.
Yes.
Saying,
yes.
Okay.
Cease and desist, or I will sue you. And at that time, it was interesting because at that time, I knew it was time. I knew it was time to stop teaching Bikram.
You were holding on to it.
I was afraid of losing students.
Yeah.
Because Bikram was it was a big force in Sydney at that time. There were a lot of Bikram studios. There were Bikram studios opening up left, right, and centre, and no one had ever converted. No one had ever made it.
All the more reason,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So you did. You took it as a sign.
I was like, right, this is it. This is the time. It felt right. I was very grateful to receive that letter in a way, and made a big plan and kind of created a practice that was sort of like to transition people from Bikram that hadn't gone to Power Vinyasa. So literally, designed a sequence that had some elements of Bikram, but not enough to get sued.
See, I relate to that too because I I never didn't start at Bikram. I was like a power vinyasa guy, but then I moved to this more therapeutic Desikachar orientation. But I was teaching in New York at the time, and if I tried to teach it in the more traditional way, like Desikachar was teaching, I would get written off in the first 2 minutes.
Right.
So I had to come up with something that was close enough to the expectation, but still allowed for me to teach the principles that I wanted to teach. So it had to look enough like it, even though it was something different.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I did. And I created a sequence that I just called Vinyasa, or Vinyasa level 1. It was like the way in for people.
Vinyasa became a style.
It did. Yes, I think that had already happened in the US.
It had. Well, so I talked about that. I think that was a real Jivamukti thing. Honestly, like they were combining. They did the Shivananda training, and then they studied with Mr. Iyengar, and then they met Pattabhi Jois, and Pattabhi Jois brought the power vinyasa craze with him. And they had a background in performance art, actually.
Right.
And so that kind of like arc of a vinyasa class, where you start in seated, and then you slowly move up to standing and do sun salutations, and then maybe you go to the wall, and then you come back and do your back bends, and then you finish all up to the Shavasana. Like that little dramatic structure, if you will, which we now call vinyasa as a style, had just kind of happened. And it did become a way for people to not be so bound by traditions, in a certain sense, to be more creative and come up with new sequencing.
Yeah, totally. Well, because it was around that time that we did this transition that I met my current teacher, who's Shiva Ray, and so so kind of taking it out of the power vinyasa.
She took that even farther.
More into vinyasa, which is very adaptable, and that's kind of where we headed. Where I headed as a teacher, and so circling back.
Yes, so you had the one studio, you get the letter from him, you're like, okay, no more Bikram. We're going to go full in with the vinyasa, vinyasa flow.
Yes.
And then, okay, so you have the one center there, but then you said that, why does that one end?
So that one, we came to the end of the lease.
Okay, so this was not the marriage, this was the lease.
This is the lease.
See, I knew it's got to be one or the other, usually.
moved into the new studio space with my then ex-husband as a business partner.
So you guys stayed working together?
Yes, for a short time.
I see. Well, in the interest of time, we won't go all into that.
We don't have to go there. We don't have to go there.
But so that dissolves away, and then it's just you?
So my partner Rod, who you met just earlier.
Hey, man.
So we started our studio that we have now in yoga 5 years ago, which we've just moved to a new location and changing things up again.
So wait a second. So there was an initial incarnation. You said we just moved. Where was that place?
In the same location where we are now. So literally just in the same suburb. Yeah.
And so if you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.